Welcome again, viewers who are following us today on this Pan-African Friday, from wherever you are and from whichever platform you are on the social media, on your TV screen, on your phone, in your car, wherever you are. We welcome you to this episode of Pan-African Friday of today. Today, with me in the studio, the usual persons and panelists. I have Ndugu Rugarama, and since last week, and I can assure the viewers that this time Ndugu Rugarama is around. It's not going anywhere. But I'm also joined by Dada Rachel. He's called to accuse me that I call her Ntagali. This time is Takali, who are with me in the studio today. As usual, we'll be looking at a number of issues that concern the African continent, the African people, because African people are not only in Africa, there are those in the diaspora, and there are those who are living elsewhere outside of Africa. So all the African people, wherever we are, this is your program, and I suppose those who are following us and keenly so. Ndugu Rugarama, how has been the week?
Good morning, viewers, and my dear comrades in the studio. The week has been characterized by a number of events, but I want to single out the tribal undertones that have largely been littered all over the media, print, electronic, whoever you listen to, with the exception of those spaces which are very tight on controlling what you say, and also minding the professionalism. But when you listen to some of these what they call debates, and you hear our politicians talk, you really get a feel that the 10-point program of NRM, which was later expanded to the 15-point program, probably one of the major items, which was to do away with sectarianism, has either long been forgotten, or we have relaxed that now it is the norm to openly, without any due regard to morality and our constitution, practice sectarianism.
Okay.
The other, maybe what I want to point out, is the other one, which was at our senior, the burial of our young brother, the son to Alhaji Naduri. Jakana is the name. Mm-hmm. And the roughing up of one of the mourners who had come to attend the burial, purely on such sentiments. So I really mourn the death of the young brother, but at the same time, when you look at what was taking place, the kind of eulogies that were coming from the mourners, those who got the opportunity to talk, and later on what was in the media, you get the feel that, that the issue of race, sectarianism is rearing its ugly head once again.
Of course, a lot has been happening within this week, and the number of issues like you are raising have been really looked at in this country, but also the continent. Today, we also take time to look at the citizenry, the citizens of Africa. Of course, we have been talking about an Africa without borders. And then we are now today looking at the people, the citizenry. And by definition, a citizen is that person and of a particular place and the relationship, who has a relationship with the state to which they owe allegiance, and also, of course, the state gives protection to the people who subscribe to that state. So we're looking at the citizens of Africa today to see what makes us Africans to be citizens of Africa, and are we really citizens of Africa, or what needs to be done so that the citizenry of Africa is actualized. This and more are the things that we shall be looking at in the discussion today. Sister Rachel, how has been your week?
It's been activity-packed, but aside from that, definitely the tragedy of the week in this country has been the death of the 11 children at Salama, School of the Blind. It was an amazing situation. It is suspected that someone actually did this. There is no indication at all that it was an accident, which really puts us front and center in a place where we must reflect on why these practices have increased in number. People are increasingly doing more terrible things by the day.
But come to think about it, why would, of all persons, a person target blind children?
It's hard to understand. There is no one who has been
Is
able
it
to
out
explain.
of for money? Is it for malice? Is it one would say, is it the devil? But of course, the devil may not have gone there to light the fire.
That aside, the school itself is on record saying that they had received threats that should Princess Royal, who's late Queen Elizabeth, his daughter, and the present King's sister, should she actually implement her plan to visit, they will visit a hardship on that school.
I understand.
We don't know if these are the people who actually carried out this crime, but it's hard to understand, because at least if they wanted to make a statement, there were empty buildings at the time. Why did they set those on fire? It's not a good thing, but it's better than killing the children. So I think it's a summary of where we are as a society. We really don't care if it's the children we kill. We really don't care if the innocent parties are caught in between.
Sure.
It speaks about where we are as a society. But aside from that, there's also been a lot of activity, particularly at Speak Resort Monyonyo this week. There have been high-flying engagements. The East African Court of Justice Judicial Conference is still on. The President met with EU delegates. There has also been a biblical convention of sorts.
We also had the women judges.
Very much so.
We also had the IGAD.
Absolutely.
And we also had the UNAFRI. So
it's really been packed in terms of regional and international meets.
Oh, which is good for Africa, for Uganda.
Of course it is. But of course the Ebola situation continues. They are trying hard to calm nerves, especially beyond Uganda. I'm not sure that people are rattled around here so far. Even if Ebola has made strides in this town as we talk, it still, they say, is under control, and we hope it remains that way.
But I also hope so, because Ebola is not, this is not the first time we're having Ebola in this country.
And our record has been very good in managing this Ebola.
We had to go and help people in West Africa and some other parts. So I think it is true that we have some cases registered in Kampala, but I think there's no cause for alarm yet, because still whatever as has happened can be managed, and I trust that the health systems in this country have over time now grown robust, and they will be able to manage this. And if it goes out of hand, of course, there are all avenues on what can be done.
The health infrastructure is not good, certainly we are aware, but I think Uganda, by God's grace, has always done well when it comes to some of these challenges. I hope this time round, as we think of improving the health infrastructure, we also seriously work on the remuneration of the health workers.
But also there is that very ugly word, that's lockdown.
Yeah, but if it is part of the health systems to manage the situation, still it's also just an option. But I think the worries are just too much. We may not go that far, just for this, because I think given what the health ministry has put in place, I think the situation still is under control.
So be it.
Amen. Now, today we will be, like we said earlier, looking at the citizenship or citizenry or the citizens of Africa and the borders of Africa. Because if we're talking about the citizens of Africa, then we're also looking at which Africa are we talking about. Because as we speak now, what makes Africa, and which we discussed the other time, or something we looked at it, is the economics of Africa. Because if we are to be citizens of any country, then there must be a way of benefiting, being the attributes of being us, the Africans, but also the benefits of being Africans. And I think it was one thing that the late president of Libya had definitely suggested, and very well so, when he wanted to introduce on the African continent what was then called as the African, it was the dinar, Africa. The currency, which would have been, according to him, backed by gold. And that if it were a gold-backed dinar, would have been a very strong currency, and it would have competed very well with the American dollar and the French franc in Africa, amongst and then the IMF systems. But I think this was one of the biggest, of course, indeed, like people say, that the president of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, was not known for many brilliant ideas, but this one, he got it right. Now, it was until, because when finally these guys sat down and said, this man must be killed, must be removed, one of the first persons, other than the Americans, were the French. And then Africans were so suspicious. Why did the French have this first interest in getting rid of Gaddafi? We later on heard, of course, from the expose of the emails of Hillary Clinton, that basically one of the reasons as to why they had to get rid of Gaddafi was because of the currency that he was trying to invent, and that would have completely liberated Africa economically from the shackles of colonialism. So as Africans, and surprisingly from the time Gaddafi died, because maybe others have learned from that, everyone now went back and kept quiet. But yet, to me, this was, I think, the game changer for the continent of Africa. So I think then, when we are looking at the citizenship and the citizenry of Africa, these are some of the things that we also need to be conscious of. Why? We normally blame the West, of course, for interference in this, in that, but maybe we are also part of the blame. We shouldn't also bury our heads in the sand as Africans and only blame the West, because, I mean, we have always said, talked about this, when Gaddafi was being attacked, the resolution that was drawn at the UN, some of the Africans endorsed. So it is not basically only the West. We Africans also need to look at what is good for us. No longer no wonder when Gaddafi finally was removed, the issue of the currency also quietly and smolderingly is dying out. Maybe it will come back later. But that is some of the things that I think as Africans that we need to look at, because that currency would have been the spindle for the development and the game changer of Africa. So if we are looking at the African continent and the citizenship of Africa, we should also look at how, we are looking at how we move, the movement of people on this continent, how we trade, the intra-trade with 1 billion, over 1 billion people on the continent. How do we trade? How do we move from one place to another? We are now talking about the free trade, but is it possible that Africans can move from one place to another? But also how we communicate. Communication is also very key on this continent. We are talking about introducing Swahili so that people can speak to each other as they trade, as they move. How viable is this going to be? We still have some people who believe that we do not need another language. The languages that we have are enough and we're able to communicate. But is that at the end of it, as we communicate, able to promote us into the next level where Africa will be able to talk as one, communicate in a single language? Because also we have communities even in Africa where people speak one language, but still they are not able to work together. So these are some of the
Rwandese murdered each other in the 1994 genocide. Were they not speaking Kinyarwanda?
Actually, one said they murdered themselves in one language. So these are some of the issues that we need to look at on this continent, and also the bigger picture of Africa, the bigger market of Africa. How do we make sense of all of this? Are we able to travel, and are we able to interrelate as Africans? Let's first look at how the movement on this country has affected us in terms of trade or in terms of relationship, and is it possible that we can move a step further and look at these boundaries as superficial and be able to come up? Apparently, I think people to people is very easy. People can move from one place to another, but when it comes at a policy level, are we able to liberate ourselves along those lines? I'll pick from there, from Ndug Lugarama.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mututa. Permit me start with what you equally started with, and that is just briefly about what possibly killed Gaddafi. I want to believe, and I have already stated that Gaddafi was murdered, assassinated by the imperialists, whose agenda was and still is to make sure that the efforts of Africa are thwarted. Yes, Gaddafi could have wanted to create a united Africa, and his efforts are known. His attempt at having the United States of Africa, which later was, as a compromise, reduced into Organization of African Unity, is also known. His generous contribution as part of the country's contribution to the budget of the African Union is certainly known. His extension of a helping hand at one time during the time of, was it Chirac or this other French president during the campaigns, is also known. We are aware of the so much money that he advanced to France. We are also aware of the number of engagements he was having with the fellow African leaders to ensure that Africa gets out of the shackles that still holds her. We know that Libya was the shining example of Africa because he managed to turn the otherwise desert into a flourishing green belt by diverting those waters and creating the green vegetation. That Libya, at the time of Comrade Gaddafi's death, was no longer looking at oil as the only revenue, but had ventured into agriculture. And it was going to do absolutely very well. We are also aware, had he not died, had he not been assassinated by the neo-colonialist, he was also part of the team that was having an alternative of the IMF and World Bank in now what we call the BRICS, where we have got China, Brazil, South Africa, and BRICS, Brazil, yes, China, yes, South Africa, yes, and Russia.
And Russia, yes.
There are new members who are also coming up to check on the excesses in terms of lending that and the policies of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So I thought I would come up with this, such that we see that Gaddafi didn't just vanish. And of course, so to link it up in the concept of citizenship, our citizenship is, which is highly a creation of the different legal regimes, other than what society, the African society, is known to be, is also a problem because we have got these artificial countries which were created at the Bahrain Conference 1884, 1885. And we tend to think of non-interference. That when something happened in Libya, we had a situation where South Africa, for instance, even when she was invited, then if my memory serves me right, that was Jacob Zuma.
It was Zuma.
As a president, because our own president has told us here before. He gave him a call, and the idea was to make sure that we save that country. But it never happened because we started looking at our small countries and looking at a lot of legalese. You know, we are an independent state, and we are not supposed to be venturing into another country. And there is always, as part of the bad African culture that has cropped up, pushed to us by the imperialists, this culture of let us remain within our own selves, our shells. And the Igbos will largely look at themselves as the Igbos. The Fulani will more or less do that. Some of the mistakes, of course, which were created at the time of, during the Bahrain conference, and later on, even when there is a claim that the independent countries, so-called independent countries, Nigeria, Uganda, Tanzania, and elsewhere on the African continent were gaining independence. Some of these errors, even by formation of the African Organization of African Union, were not corrected. So the boundaries were not redrawn, and I think probably that was a wise decision because it was going again to regress the process. So you get this sense, therefore, that the concept of citizenship is largely a creation of the colonial man, because we define ourselves as citizens of the states and the countries that were created by, not us, the colonial master. And this has been a very big problem in the sense that it has negatively impacted on our progress economically, and it has also disunited us further, to the extent that the Ubuntu, which is characteristic of the Africa, of an African man, is slowly dying out. I regret that, but that's what it is. And as a way of going forward, when you look at the efforts of the African Union, Organization of African Union now, in terms of redefining the concept of citizenship, and the regional groupings of, like you are saying, IGAD, the ECOWAS, the East African Community, they are all geared towards dismantling the concept of citizenship as created at the Berlin conference, but more importantly also to make sure that they get back to the real definition of citizenship as was before the advent of the colonial master.
Yeah, you were right on that. And you remember we one time discussed this thing here, and we said when Gaddafi was attacked, I mean, if we are talking about the African citizenship, if if Africa is a state, then there must be protection of its people. But you realize that even as Gaddafi was being attacked, some of the African countries were already celebrating, because you would have expected that really South Africa, as one of the biggest economies of the continent, would have been on the front against such an action. But I can also understand, and I said this at one time, that I have never been a very good friend of Zuma, for this same reason. But also, I can also understand his position, because they had a file on him of his data dealings with the Indian businessman.
The Guptas.
Yes. So he had to take a decision. If you are not going to work with us, this is what we are going to tell the rest of the world. Finally, of course, it didn't hide forever. It had to come up. So he was also in a very tricky situation, and no wonder he had. And of course, other things that, of course, have not come to the light, that were against him. So the guy was like, what I can do for now, I think, let me save my face. It was a short save. It didn't take long. Tagali, you had an idea on that.
Relating to the matter of boundaries, this thing of boundaries is not a new thing. The only difference is that the way it was perceived in ancient times and the way it was actually carried forward, if you will, was different from what we see today. Today it's a question of rigid parameters that you may not violate. But I think in ancient times it was a question of military muscle. It was whoever could go furthest per time. That is what defined boundaries. But
maybe as we talk of these artificial boundaries, it is also possible that the colonialists used our own old existing differences. Because then when the boundaries were drawn, it was like a relief sometimes like, at least those ones can be there and will be here. It is also possible, but in most cases, that there were underlying factors that there was a division of, if we leave these ones together, there could be a problem. But it is also possible in some areas that said, after all, they were already old enemies, so we can we use that to create these boundaries. It is also possible.
Yes, as I said earlier, the difference between the boundaries of ancient times and the ones of now is that the ones of ancient times were fluid. Definitely we know how far, for example, Songhai went. There were no URA officers or whoever it is that manned those borders in those days. It was a question of, if you can uproot me, that's where you begin, and that's where I end.
Sure.
But when I examine those as some of these ancient configurations, among them Songhai, if you've done history, you know, you're familiar with these kingdoms. There was Songhai, there was the Mali Empire, there was the Ghana Empire. And of course, we know that some of them had some very strong characters, such as Mansa Musa. But unfortunately, by the time the Berlin Conference sat, many of these kingdoms were in firm decline, because many of them peaked about the 12th, 13th century. And many of them, I think the one that dates back the most was what they call the Aksumite kingdom. And that one covers present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. But more than anything else, the boundaries were defined by two things. They were defined by sheer military might and economic interests. These days, you can have as much military might as you want. Russia is finding out. And have the economic muscle, but no one is willing to take it lying down, unlike in times past. I think what I'm trying to say is that the boundaries as we have them today are confining us only because we don't have that much in common. I said that before, a week ago. Europe dismantled its borders voluntarily. Of course, you know where France ends, and you know where Ireland ends, but they are not rigidly keeping one another out of their spaces, because they discovered that they do more when their interests are in common. So I said the last time we were here that the day we have more in common, the boundaries will go by themselves. They will be there on maps, of course. And the people, especially the borders, they will know that this is the beginning of Kenya and this is the beginning of Mozambique. But no one will be obsessed with keeping the neighbors out. For example, what is happening at the border with Kisoro? You know the recent spike in violence there between M23 and the government forces. As you know, Uganda is feverishly working to make sure that these people are quickly taken to camp somewhere. It's understandable in health terms because of the Ebola and other concerns, but also in terms of security, because you don't know if these ones are also M23. The long and the short is, if, for example, DRC was stable, if, for example, our interests had been merged so finely that I realized that my neighbor across the border, the better they are off, I'm proportionately better. The reason why we struggle, it is the fishbowl mentality. In the fishbowl, you eat your neighbor because there is no other way. You cannot violate the glass thing in which you find yourselves. And so us in Africa, what is causing us to be obsessed with everybody occupying their space and their space alone is because we have not worked on the core issue, which is harmonizing our interests finally. Making sure that our economic direction is the same, our monetary direction is the same, the military direction is the same. Like I said, one day, America was very divided. Some people sat around a certain table and they said, look, if we have to die trying, the southern part of this country will be dragged kicking and screaming into a union. Because that is what is the best in terms of advancing the interests of this country. The day we get there, like I said, the boundaries will take care of themselves. What is lacking? You see, part-time, one of the things that the colonizer does well is to interest us in trivialities. To interest us in the fact that, oh, when I jumped into your space, you cut my leg off. But you cut my leg off because I only have 2 health center 3s, and you're bringing 1,000 people. But if we had pooled these resources, and I had 1,000 facilities to cater for your needs and mine, there's no reason to struggle.
Yeah.
We are struggling because we have not taken care of the basics, is really where I'm coming from.
Exactly. And of course, that also explains why some of these policies and the arrangements are very slow. The other time when we were discussing, one was saying, I think we have to be slow to be sure. We have to move slowly so that we are sure. And I remember you did say that let's make mistakes as we move, but let us move. Because if you are going to fear making mistakes, then we are not going to move. If we say, so there's that discussion. Should we move faster so that we can catch up with the rest? Or should we wait and see what others are doing so that we can learn from them, then we can be able to move? But that notwithstanding, you realize that again, on the issue of movement, I think it was in 2014, when the heads of state sat and they agreed that we need to have the free movement of people on this continent, and of course that will come with a lot of opportunities. They said that for Africans should be given visas on arrival, and that there should be a 30-day mandatory visa for the African citizens. If you are moving from here to Nigeria or to another country, you don't need a visa, but you can receive that visa. That was in 2014. And I think in their thinking that was by 2018 we should have an African passport, so that people are able to move freely on the continent. But since then, a lot has definitely happened from that 2014 summit up to today. We don't have that visa yet. I mean, that visa-free movement. Even in East Africa, I told you last time when I was going to Tanzania, they said, ukiingia hapa kama hauna passport hautaingia. So in other countries, you are using only your ID to travel within the East African region. I heard yesterday, I think, on the news when the Minister for East African Affairs, Rebecca Kadaka, was saying, I think was echoing the same thing, say, if we are moving, that we need Africans to move free. So let's have it. What is holding us from doing that? Is it because of crime? Is it because of what? But even this crime and the other things can be looked at as we move. So if we're not going to have a continental movement, free movement of people, and of course that comes with other services, then are we able, are we talking about anything at all?
Auntie, like I was saying, that there are some subtle things, and I think that is really what constitutes neocolonialism.
Yeah.
Neocolonialism, unlike the original kind of colonialism, is largely not a forceful situation. It's a cunning and calculative approach to global affairs. It's steeped in undermining existing governments and policies and so on. It's steeped in propaganda, soft power, they call it. But it is very effective. Because as you said, if you sit across from these people and you say, my friends, you're not doing well by yourself. Your neighbor has resources that can help you move forward. Some of our people, including one of our very near neighbors, who are not specified at this time, is being repeatedly accused by one of our biggest neighbors of messing up their country. They don't want to enter a legal understanding. They don't want to do it in an open fashion. As in, look, you have all the minerals I need to power my economy. Let's do business. One of the things that the colonizer does well is to make sure that you're always at each other's throats. If in fact it is true that this our small neighbor and this our big neighbor are really caught up in this dynamic, why? Why can't this smaller country reach out to the other one and say, my friend, I am so small, my economy cannot thrive.
But if you are small, then your economy can also be smaller, so you don't need to.
And that's what, those are the things we don't understand. Why can't you enter a formal arrangement with your neighbor? Say, look, maybe I have the capacity to secure your security. You have the capacity to secure my economy. Why can't we find a win-win? What is wrong with that? Just like Madame Kadaga said, what is wrong with practicing some of these things? But it's because, like I said, the colonizer, who's a ghost now, is no longer here physically, but is a ghost that is extremely active, is busy really working these people into situations that are not good for anybody.
Yeah, but again,
and the day we understand that, we'll start moving forward.
Like we said, some of these ghosts, when these heads of state sat and in 2014, like we were saying, and they agreed that let's have, by 2018, no visa requirement for the African citizenship. And I think so far we have the Seychelles, we have the Gambia, and which other country? And the Benin. Those ones have opened for the African countries. You can move there visa free. South Africa has allowed 15 countries from Africa. You can move there, including Uganda. I think you can go there visa free. But allowing...
Seychelles used to be on that list.
Yes, and allowing... Seychelles, yes, and allowing 24 other countries from elsewhere outside of Africa. Africa 15, the rest of the world 20, I think 25, including Americas, the Europe and the Asians to enter so free. Now, do you think these imbalances is going to see us see a free, a mandatory free movement of Africans on the African continent in Nduguru Garama?
When you look at the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, it purposes inter area and envisages a situation where we are borderless. But at the same time, that must be properly explained. Borderless Africa means what? That we are able to trade, and therefore we are able to move freely without restrictions. Now that includes the removal of visa restrictions, like we were saying. At the same time also, we are looking at the ability of the commodities to be able to move, so the development of the infrastructure and also communication. And these are some of the hindrances that we were talking about. That if the infrastructure, communication infrastructure, the transport ability to move on the water, on the roads, in the air is seriously inhibited, then we have got these non-tariff barriers. We are not going to be able to, and then we hide behind the citizenship that I'm a citizen of this particular country and this is the way we do our thing. That is hiding behind a creation that was not ours to start with, and also undermining your efforts to move ahead. And we have done that for quite a long time. And when you look at, for instance, the legal arguments that we have had on the African continent, there is one example not long ago when Nigeria was having issues with Cameroon about a territory on the common border, and they went to this international court. Later on, of course, Cameroon took the territory. But the natives there, the people there, are actually largely Nigerians. If you like. Now, all of them had to go.
Like the Buganga situation.
You have to move.
The lost counties. So at the end of the day, you get a situation that we need to, and I think that's what African Union is trying. The African people, the African Union, the regional groupings that we are talking about, I think that is how they are trying to address the malaise. We may have lost an opportunity which was espoused by the late Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in 63 to have the United States of Africa. But gradually, and of course I regret that that didn't happen, and even those who were there at that time, including the late Kambariga Julius Nyerere, had to go and visit the grave of Kwame Nkrumah and apologize. He says, I didn't see it your way then, but you were right. Now, if
I will have ghosts.
Yes, if I was there, I would have, I wouldn't have apologized because I would have gone with what Nkrumah was proposing.
Exactly.
But now that we lost that
then you
opportunity.
would be dead by now.
No,
but eventually, anyway, you die anyway.
Be in the annals of history. So the point really that we are making is that when you look at the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, one of the major aspects of that body is to make sure that we expand and make relevant the concept of citizenship. We have such a thing as African citizen, not Togolese, not Senegalese, Ugandan, Kenyan. And that I support. When you look at all these regional groupings that I was talking about, for instance, the ECOWAS, when you look at the EACA, the East African community, what we are looking at is that we can trade freely, we can interchange and exchange labor quickly, have free movement. We do away with all these sorts and manner of tariffs for purposes of expanding our economies, generating and high revenues, so that these tribal undertones that we were talking about, and this business of I'm Kenyan, I'm Tanzanian, I'm Ugandan, the moment we kill it, the borders, and I think it was Takari who talked about it here. He said that some of these borders will naturally go away. I agree. They will naturally go away when we progressively advance to a stage that looks beyond the geographical borders.
Yes. Yeah, because unless we do that, then we'll still be cut out in our small areas, that you don't have to. And of course, like we said at the beginning, the issue of currency is also key when it comes to the integration of Africa. How
the African Free Trade Continental Area also captures that. And of course, it is an uphill task. Let me just take you a little bit back and see what I'm talking about. The so-called French West Africa has been under one currency. When they tried to modify it in the introduction of the eco currency, and they were being joined by Nigeria, you saw what the French government did.
Exactly.
It interfered very quickly, and they made sure that Nigeria was not party. Although Nigeria was at the helm of making sure that the eco currency comes into place.
Yeah.
But they sabotaged that, they injected in money, they threatened the respective governments, and now the kind of eco currency that we have in the former French West Africa is a watered down version of the kind of currency that they had wanted. So bottom line is, when you look at some of the hindrances that were making the economies, respective economies of the French West Africa, like you talk about these other economies, be it the ones which were directly under the colonial rule of the English, there will always be the tag that your economy is tagged to the reserve, the central bank reserve in London, central bank reserve in Washington, and that the policies, the International Monetary Fund policies, the IMF policies, will always apply to whatever countries you want to talk about. That's why for me, I've always told the viewers that it doesn't matter. And you see, because ask yourself, is it that the African man, the African leadership, is so cast, or they breastfeed from the same source, that there is the same blueprint, whether you are being praised as a Democrat, that your democratic credentials in your respective countries are high, you will always suffer what your predecessors suffered.
Exactly.
Now, why is that so? It is so because you virtually, as a leader, has got nothing apart from appearing on media and giving powerful and persuasive speeches, but your economic blueprint, your investment blueprint, will always be controlled from certain centers. And as long as, what Gaddafi was proposing, as long as we do not attack those centers that disfavor the African leadership from having organic, self-driven approach, you will always suffer the same fate that your predecessors suffered.
Exactly, because a frame of the frame that has been developed, and we have seen this not only in Nigeria, even up today. As if you are to travel to the West African France, like they call it, the states of the French in the West Africa, I think if you are coming from the English-speaking country, your visa will be $200. And that is whether you are coming from where, as long as you are coming from a non-French country, you will pay that.
There are even arrangements that are more ridiculous. Try moving from English-speaking Cameroon to the French part.
French.
It's very ridiculous.
But also, yes, but also when you look at, I think that time the people were in Tunisia, if you miss your flight, that you want to get a visa, if you're coming from an English-speaking country, also to stay in the country for after missing your flight, first of all, you will pay twice as your ticket, and also, so it is so ridiculous that, but my problem is not this happening. My problem is, where is Africa in this? When we come back, we are going to look at issues that really needs to be addressed immediately by the leadership of this continent. If Africa is to talk of independence, both economically, but also the political independence that we claim we have, actually not only claiming we have acquired, but then how do we make use of that independence as we come together as the people of the continent of Africa? Don't go away. Shortly, we'll be back after the break.
Of the day on UBC.
If I'm looking at issues of taxation and all that, I will definitely run for the Kateshumbas. Okay? Okay. If I look at, if I'm looking at issues of investments and what, I would definitely run. I would definitely run for Dr. Emure Kugonza and Honorable Omara. Okay? If I'm looking at issues of the law, I will run for our very, very own people. I have the Oboso Bosses, I have the Katuntus, I have the Robin Arwakojos. So everyone is talented in one way or another.
Did you mention Katuntu?
Okay. Yes.
Is he yours?
Yes, he is.
Yours as in NRM?
He is.
Was brought to you by
Simply make a small deposit of 99k and pay the balance mpola. You can pay in daily, weekly or even monthly installments while you enjoy your new phone. So what are you doing today? Visit any MTN shop near you and get the MTN cupboard. That's super easy.
The Ministry of Health informs the public that there are confirmed cases of Ebola in Uganda. We, however, urge the public not to panic as the situation is being managed. The Ministry of Health further reminds the public to be on the lookout for any persons who may show signs and symptoms of Ebola. These include high body temperature, abdominal pains, diarrhea, vomiting, bleeding from the body openings such as the nose, eyes, and mouth. Please inform the nearest health worker immediately if you see anyone with these signs and symptoms. To prevent Ebola from spreading further, please take the following preventive measures: regular washing of hands with water and soap, avoid handshaking and hugging, avoiding any contact with any suspected Ebola patients. Any person who dies suddenly should not be buried but reported to the nearest health worker or LC1 immediately. For further information, please call the Ministry of Health toll-free number on 0800 100-066 or send a free SMS to your report on 8500. This message is from the Ministry of Health with support from UNICEF and World Health Organization.
Welcome to the Living Room Stadium. It's the FIFA World Cup. The match is about to start. Food and drink ready. There's no space left for anyone. Come on, get your lucky chair. Take your usual spot. Even the puppy has one. It's preparation time. You can feel the tension in the air. And do you have everything you need to believe?
We bring you a fresh, well-researched program to help you identify opportunities for investment, job creation, growing your entrepreneurial skills, wealth creation, and social transformation.
We have a product that is ready for schools, supermarkets.
Create wealth, transform livelihoods. Every week we showcase opportunities for creating new products and services.
I now harvest a lot of cocoa. When I harvest it, I sell. After selling, I put money in my project. I have two projects. One is for construction of my house. Two is for educating my children.
Excellence in innovation, the passion and drive to succeed, and the right mindset to grow your business. Create wealth, transform livelihoods. Brought to you by Operation Wealth Creation.
Welcome back, viewer, and thank you for being with us on this episode of Pan-African Friday today, as we examine issues that actually concern us as the people of this continent of Africa and the Africans who are living outside of Africa. Takali, you are talking about even the small micro divisions that exist even in this, in the same country, same people, same everything, but just because one is speaking the other language. But you can also talk even look at Congo, Kinshasa and Congo, Brazzaville. These cities are divided
by a river.
A river Congo. It's just a span of about 8 kilometers apart. But in fact, if they agree to come together, they will be it will be the biggest metropolitan of Africa in Congo. But you crossing from Brazzaville to Kinshasa, you pay, I think, close to about $50, and 8 kilometers just across. Now, when you look at it again in terms of economics, San Francisco and Auckland are the same distance, 8 kilometers, but you can see how business transactions done between these two cities. So are we saying that, and it is not the French actually who are imposing that you don't move from one Kinshasa to another, much as the countries share the name. So is this a problem of Africa only, or is it the weakness of Africa, like one I was saying? Are we so weak that we cannot come together and say, come and buy, enough is enough?
I think it's a combination of factors, but I have said many times here before that because the blueprint that Nduguru Garama was talking about has never been adequately internalized.
But if we have been able to steal many things, why can't we get this blueprint and we change things, really?
Well, first of all, it's not tangible. I talked about a ghost.
But this even good at arresting ghosts. So there must be something, literally. What I'm saying is that there must be something which is bigger and wrong, bigger than we know, that even when we want to do that, and Nduguru Garama talked about it, that when you like President Gaddafi was trying to do to erase that some of that part of the blueprint that had issues. Is it that fear that has now crippled the African leadership, say, I don't want to be the next one? Nduguru Garama.
Generally speaking, majority of, not just Africa, but since we are talking about Africa, majority of our leaderships to start with, even if it is a democracy, in majority of the cases, the Western hemisphere, the capitalists, they create this euphoria. They create a political climate in different countries of their influence on the African continent that when they deliver a president, that president is going to be painted by BBC and CNN and other associated media as the most democratic president that has been delivered by the citizens, when in actual sense there has been a very strong hand of the leadership in the other part of the country. That we have seen on the African continent in many countries, and later, of course, some of us are proven correct, because we always tell those who care to listen that just give it time. He will also end like the other one ended, if not worse. So the fear that you are talking about, I can give you my 101% assurances that majority of the political leadership that is ushered in our respective African countries is actually not indigenous. Now, when that happens, when you pay your allegiance mainly to the policies, to those who brought you in quietly, then you are not going to stop fearing. You have to fear. That's one. Two, even if by whatever other means you came into leadership, slowly but surely, the powers that be, those who could control the forces of how you live, how your people access education, how they access health, how they go about the trade, then you cannot afford to remain with that level, clear-headedness and level of independence that you came with. So what happens is that gradually you keep losing ground. And as long as you lose ground, you cede ground to the adversary, if you permit me, then you will know that you cannot run away from what the captor intends to extract from you. And this has been the story of Africa. Now, all the efforts which we try to make as a continent, for instance, in the regional groupings we are talking about, in continental formations that we have made, like the Africa Free Trade Continental Area that we are talking about, it's a very wonderful formation. It's a very beautiful document if you look at it. And what it proposes to achieve, I can assure you, even if we achieved 65% of what the Africa Free Trade Continental Area, Free Trade Area proposes,
sure,
would just be on a different pedestal altogether. But look, the neo-colonialist is not asleep. He's looking at the efforts like he has looked at all the other efforts of other initiatives that Africa has come up with, and he steadily undermines them. You've seen, we are talking about, for instance, if you discover your own natural resource, like oil, and you want to make sure that you make your people a better people. Forget about these issues of corruption. You know, when you don't go deep in some of these issues, you're going to be corrupted into corrupt thinking, and your power, level of power to think independently and analyze issues is going to be cut short.
Sure.
In the sense that you are going to forget, for instance, that when we talk about corruption averagely, when you look at the African Development Bank, it puts what we lose as a country through corruption, and I think that was 2019 report, 2019-2020. It puts what we lose as a continent at 50 billion USD per annum. But when you look at what the colonial man, the imperialist, steals, and in majority of the cases we don't use our eyes, the naked eye does not see that. But what the imperialist steals clandestinely from the African continent per annum is well over 500 billion USD. Now, who is the bigger thief in that respect? But the point really, again, also, is that even when you look at, and this is where we need to marshal the plan, the energy, we must galvanize our efforts to make sure that we accelerate our efforts in creating an independent source of income. Because, look, we say Uganda has developed oil, that we have got this oil and we are going to manage it our own way. All the financiers, and you see these banks are interlinked. In fact, for me, I'm one of the happiest people. As a Pan-Africanist, I'm very happy that we seem to be having a very widening ridge, a very widening gap between Russia and her allies with America and NATO. Why? Because we can now talk about a dollar being challenged, not being the dominant the currency in which the entire globe must trade.
Yes.
We are happy that they seem to be light at the end of the tunnel, that we can have some other big economies coming to our rescue. Two elephants are fighting. If we open our eyes, we are going to benefit. Also, let me also add this, that when we look at, for instance, the Ugandan oil, some of these banks had frustrated our efforts. And there was no way you could get money from anywhere. But fortunately, with these kind of fights on the global scene by the big powers, we can also afford to go and say, you see, for us, we are your friends. We have no problem. And they will come and develop our oil sector. To me, that is the reality. But if they are all together, you will find these so-called campaigners of the clean energy, clean environment. They are in Paris, they are holding placards. Don't sponsor the exploitation of the oil in Uganda. Some white woman on the streets of Paris, she's holding placards. They are inviting their president to make sure that they do not advance money for that purpose. When in actual sense, multi-billion, multinational corporations who are direct under the armpits of the respective capitalistic hegemonic economies are geared towards frustrating this kind of revenue, such that you do not develop an economic muscle to be able to help out your people and help out your neighbors and have that sufficiency in independence of the economy and therefore independence of the mind. This is our dilemma as a continent.
Last time when we were talking, we said Africa is not actually as poor as it is.
It has never been poor. We are always donating to the poor.
We have money. No wonder France is stealing all the money from West Africa and then bagging and giving it back at will. And we have, but also, last time we didn't talk about it, but when you look at the northern part of Africa, they have an arrangement of their monetary fund. And that money has helped them to fund some of their projects internally without necessarily crying to some of these people who we think we take like our relatives who are trying to help us. So, but I think also part of the problem of Africa is that we have not been able to enhance the capacities to put together finances that can help us to finance our own projects, because some of the things definitely will not want to go to them. They will never have it for free, because they will give you, but of course they will want something for that.
Let me give you information, and this one will disturb you, but this is a fact. Our own bank, African Development Bank, I can assure you that it is Nigeria, it is South Africa, and the contribution and some other country. And the contribution they give is even not 30% of the monies availed to the bank to lend out. In other words, we have got foreign countries who are contributing to the African, do you hear that? We have got the over 70% of the money in Africa Development Bank is given by economies like Japan, America, and other conceptual West countries to be able, and we call it Africa Development
Exactly,
Bank.
that was what I was coming to. Because this is not it's not an African bank. It is an agency, fine.
That's
it is a bank.
like the AU.
Exactly.
And the African Parliament.
Yes.
I mean, it's really ridiculous.
So unless we see this, we look, because in essence, when these guys agreed in 2018 and signed the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of the issues that were looked at in this agreement was that this should be able to facilitate trading, but also looking at the issue of financing on the African continent, so that people are able to get financing, but also do free trade. And this forms, I think, one of the biggest free trade blocks in the world.
I think it's the biggest.
Yes.
If she should take off.
Exactly. Now, if for me, who is not keen or who does not want to see that happen, I'm not going to keep quiet. I'll definitely have to influence. But okay, those influences are there that this people can, through even the so-called African Development Bank, be able to give instructions because they're putting in money, whoever pays the piper.
Because the tune.
Yes. So can't Africa, because, and when again looking at the dream of Gaddafi was not even looking at the African Development Bank, was looking at something like the IMF, that capacity, that we should be able as Africans to generate our own revenue, and from that generation be able to fund our own activities with, of course, support from elsewhere, but we should be able to have a decision. Now, when you look at what is happening, that dream seem to be fading out. But as he put it, the other thing is, so when all this is happening, do we have leadership on this continent?
That's a good one. I think in terms of even throwing more light on this very shameful situation, the African Free Continental Trade Area is undergirded by what is called the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. That one is the one through which payments are envisaged to go through. If, for example, I'm paying for salt from Cameroon, instead of struggling with this bank, engaging with the other one that speaks I don't know which language, that has codes I don't know what nature, the idea is to harmonize these trade links under this system. But let me tell you how badly this continent is doing. Since that arrangement was thrown into gear, as we talk, this arrangement is sits on the backbone of central banks. Central banks have to all be, registered, and of course the central banks act as clearing houses of their commercial banks. The Nigerian commercial banks undergirded by the central bank and so on. As we talk, as of June actually, 8 central banks have been enrolled. Where are the others? No, we're talking about how bad this thing is. Then, of course, 28 commercial banks. Are those the only ones on this continent? So they're saying... And
yet we have 54 countries that have already signed to the agreement?
No, that's how bad this twisted thinking. In other words, they just sit on this fence and it's as if they're waiting for you to fail. You say, please, people, this thing can only work if we are together. You're talking about the resources. The resources are here. What money is available to all these banks? If it was pooled, don't you think it can move us forward? But even there is a vested interest in making sure even that doesn't work. So now they're saying, okay, the timeline is 2024 to make sure all central banks are enrolled in this PAP system. And then after that, all commercial banks by end of 2025. But it is clearly the same reluctance to do what is best for us.
Yeah, because sometimes also the overriding interest, because we are discussing and negotiating as Africa. You remember the other time when I think East Africa was negotiating something with Europe, and Kenya had to go ahead and cut a deal with the UK.
I mean, it is that same...
Going against that
we don't understand.
Exactly.
is almost criminal. But what is also true is that some of these things which happen on the African continent, and we attribute them to individual countries, the level of selfishness, if you like,
at the top level,
is not, in a majority of the cases, is not something that is generated from the individual specific countries on the African continent. Some of these policies and some of these negotiations, for instance, which look as if some leaders on the African continent are doing it at individual level, and they are going against the spirit, for instance, of the East African community. In the case of Kenya,
yes,
I want to assure you that there are certain forces behind. There are things like your debt burden is in so many billion of dollars. Now, if you, for instance, allow this deal to go through, we are going to make sure that this so much is forgiven. Now, in actual sense, then what are they doing now? That they are controlling your mind. Your decision is not the kind of decision you would have taken if you are allowed to think through some of these issues.
That's what they did to
Zuma. And this is what they do.
They did to Zuma.
Now, when they do
that's
that,
what they did to Uganda
yes.
when NRM first took over. This was not President Museveni's thing.
The barter trade we were having, they frustrated it. And
they killed it. Frustrated, they killed it.
Completely. And we were having very good, because I remember Tanzania was having generators and we wanted generators. Now we had the beans, but we couldn't go through. What they did finally is that they ended up supplying beans in Tanzania.
The very thing you're talking about.
The deer died. So what I'm saying is, some of these things which we claim are selfish creations and exposures of the individual African countries, and frustrating the spirit, for instance, of ECOWAS, spirit of East African community, is because we have for a very long time been in very vulnerable positions. And because we have not gotten out of that, and we are also lacking a caliber of leadership which is Pan-African largely, we've got a situation of compromises. You see, we are in short supply of the Ngwame Nkurumas of this world, of the Patrice Lumumbas of this world, of the Thomas Sankaras of this world, the Soko Toures of this world. We have situations whereby even the intending leaders, by the way, when you cast your eye on some of the people who want to be leaders on the African continent, you are like, should I remain on this African continent? If it were not, that some of us are diehards and we think we may create some difference by staying around, I can assure you, I was blaming those who ran away. Europe. I was blaming those who ran away from this continent. I still blame them. But sometimes when you take a back seat and you reflect and you're like, but by the way, are they to blame? I can assure you that some of our leadership here, although I know that they are not doing it on their own, there are certain influences. There are certain level of influences that you need to examine with microscopic exactness. And when you do that, I can assure you, even if you get like Kosara says in Darkness at Noon, the more you get the healing knife. If some of these things are not drastically and dynamically handled, the more you get the healing knife and apply it on the wound, the larger it will widen. So we have reached at a level of cancer which is at level 4.
Now, even at that level 4, I think the hope is not totally gone, because what needs to be done is to, again, when you look at the leadership, and of course my problem is generally with the leadership, is that you again see people who are, personally I have my issues with Malema, but sometimes I find him very cardinal when it comes to some of these African issues.
My man is Malema. I wouldn't. He defines the concept of African citizenship very well. How? He will tell you that we do not have to look at ourselves as South Africans. These are colonial boundaries. Correct. I give him a tick. He tells you Zimbabweans, Nigerians are our brothers. If anything, if you had any trouble, you have trouble with these whites here. I'm not supporting that they go and kill them, but these guys, the whites, killed so many blacks in South Africa. I give another tick. He says we can have our own language. I don't have to speak Xhosa, I don't have to speak Fulani, I don't have to speak. We can deliberately have Swahili, we develop it, we package it, and it becomes an African language. Citizenship.
You know, it was introduced in South African schools.
Yes, the universities. Now, to me, my brother Malema is the deal.
My only problem with Malema is the radicalism. Otherwise, I also have no problem.
But has he killed anyone?
Yeah, but that also ends up to
those who claim are not radicals. They are the worst because they hide under. Who is not a radical?
France
looked at Dr. Arcana who was expounding and exposing the evils of France
And they
in the
murdered him.
entire East Africa. They influenced her removal from her ambassadorial role of the diaspora in the African, on the Organization of African Union. That voice had to die, and that's what they wanted. Why? Because she was telling the entire world that France actually is stealing the economy, ripping off the economies of their former colonies, and we have to do something about it. That the UN forces in the DRC are actually there to make sure that they protect the siphoning of the resources of DRC. We need, as African continent, to do something and turn that country into a hub that will provide medicine. What was wrong with that?
No, but you know, for me, like I told you earlier, with the Malema, I have no problem with him, except with the radicalism. But sometimes I also agree with him when he raises a number of issues on Africa, but also the leadership. I think he's one person who is very opposed to Zuma until maybe the death is when they part. But also when you talk about, and one of these days I think we'll have him on the show here to talk about the African issues. I think he has not had time, but has promised he will give us time to discuss issues of Africa. But again, on Ambassador Arikana, you know, Africa is, that's why for me, it is not that much we should put a blame on the West. France was very uncomfortable with this lady when she was in the US as the African ambassador.
Which means she did her job well.
Yes, she was doing her job well, and she was telling people, and one of these days we shall also, I can tell viewers that we shall have Arikan herself on this show to talk about her issues and the African issues. But it is now, again, unfortunately, who was the president? I mean, who was the chairman of not the chairman of the AU then?
Mahathir?
No. It was Madame Dlamini at the hem.
Zuma.
Yes, at the hem of the African Union Secretariat. That is when Arikana was removed. But when you follow it up, then it goes to France.
Really? I think it was, her term had lapsed. She was removed when His Excellency, I think Mahathir.
Came on.
Check that, yes. It was during the Mahathir's regime.
But like you said,
it had already been laid.
It was already someone else moving the levers. Surely, whether it was you in that seat at that time, she would have gone.
Yes.
Because the person underwriting your thing is saying, I don't want that one.
Yeah, because they had raised. So the problem,
that is the soft power which Sister Takar was talking about.
Yes, they don't come out
it
to
is
say
a carrot and stick.
But they pull the strings behind
the admission of Israel for observer status in at the African Union itself, we know how it was supposed to be done. But how did they do it? A single chairperson is the one who unilaterally invited Israel for what is Israel observing at African Union? What are they observing?
But like you said,
yes,
the tragedy really.
It is not he who is watching us. It is us who are night dancing, because at the end of it all, someone will be watching anyway. Let's not mind about what they are doing, what they are saying, but the question is, what are we doing?
But also, I think there's a special role for the Arikanas of this world and of the Malemas of this world. You see, when you're in the presidential seat or the prime minister's seat, you're immediately disempowered. The day you swear in is the day you begin the disempowerment. Because you cannot propagate the values you would like to propagate.
So who should do that then?
What I am saying is that that seat is one of unhealthy positions all day long and your entire reign. For the simple reason that you discover, for example, look at the budgets, our budgets. Someone will say, half of your budget is financed by the EU. How can you talk authoritatively to the same people?
Then why can't you run with half your budget and do so little, but at least you'll be safe?
It's because we have failed to make those decisions.
We have seen, for example, Cuba that has been under lock and key for all these years without any external funding, but have been able to survive. You mean Africans cannot do that?
We have refused to do what it takes.
Now.
Yes,
exactly.
That takes leadership. That's what we are talking about.
We have refused to do what it takes. There are two things.
And finally, when this money comes from the EU, from wherever, what happens? You hear it has been stolen.
That's what I'm saying, that because when you get to that place, I said, the day you swear in, whether you're the Prime Minister of Guinea, whether you're the President of Mozambique, whether you're the Chief Minister of Mauritania, the day you say, I, Mr. Mututa, hereby swear in as the Prime Minister of this state on the African continent. But of course it's true in Asia and elsewhere. That is the day you begin to realize that you're not in charge. That is the moment.
They will
because
align you.
They will begin to systematically clip your wings. By the end of 5 years, you realize that you will never be able to get where you wanted to go.
But that has been so, and I agree with you, because we have been electing people who are deal cutters. Because then you know, if you're not
necessarily. They actually believe this good vision that you're talking about.
They think they will achieve it.
They believe it, by the way. In fact, some of them have. There was this man in Senegal not long ago who was in opposition for 20 years before becoming the president. Some time ago.
Okay.
But anyway, when you get there, you propagate these values all day long. That's why I said there's a place for the Malemas of this world.
Yeah.
You propagate these values when you're not in the main seat. The day you get there, you will discover I cannot do any better than Matuta. Because there are so many strings attached. You're so confined. You're in a straight jacket. You'll discover, look, if I want to revisit the electricity prices, or at the third step, I'll meet France. Okay, now let me change the infrastructure.
The Magufuli of Africa even took Magufuli himself in Tanzania. You want me to say that again? That if you want to do what, for instance, Magufuli did, you must be prepared to pay the price with your life.
Now, it is that bad. We've said many times here before that what took the founding fathers, the secretaries and the Nkurumas and the NASAs of this world, what took them is alive and well today.
Yeah, but of course,
just a moment. If you intend to go that path of true African emancipation, you need to make your will.
Yes.
It is that bad. You need to make your will before starting this progress, because you will surely die.
Yeah, because
it is that bad.
Exactly. But again, at one point, you are going to die anyway.
Before your time now.
Yeah, because the time.
This will be before your time.
Now, do you know how many attempts were on the life of the late Fidel Castro? How many deaths?
What about Gaddafi himself?
So many.
And this
man, but that is what we are saying.
Man of Venezuela.
So what happened?
The one who died.
Chegu, I mean,
not Chavez.
No.
Was it Chavez?
Chavez.
Yeah, but that, for me, that is not a problem.
No, what we are saying is that we are short of people who are willing to pay the ultimate price. That is why, when you get to that seat, you will discover what you thought was there and what is there.
Then you cut a deal.
True. That is why many of our leaders have been reduced to pillaging their own states. There is nowhere to go except in death, unfortunately. The founding fathers understood and they were willing. The present fathers are not willing. So they keep injuring us. They will not be honest that, my friends, I cannot move not because I don't want. But there is a tiger on the left, there is a lion on the right, there is a serpent on the east. They have not been honest. So we kept piling them with blame.
Yeah, because the blame, why we blame them again, is that you tell us
they have refused that
there's a problem here. And we need to work together to solve it.
These tigers, they'll call you in the morning.
Because
they'll threaten you in the evening.
Because when you do that, they do what they did to Zuma. Say, do you remember we have this here? And then
they will do everything, and they'll make sure.
Now, for me, that will always be there. But and that's why we need people who are sober. And you know, President Magufuli, even when he died, it is after he died that people began saying, maybe this man was even right. Because now when you hear the theories and things that are coming out later on after he's dead, people are saying, maybe.
No, he was right, but the cost is high.
Yes, but it is also, that's what it means, leadership. Now, if we are going to have leaders who, like I said, deal cutters, will look for the best opportunity to say, don't you need money? After all, you are retiring in the next few years anyway. And the man will say, yes. So if you need money, you have to keep quiet, and that has to happen.
Let me say this, Comrade Mututa, and to our viewers. You see, the truth of the matter is that as Africans on this African continent, majority of our troubles are exogenously engineered. Now, we have got very unfortunate circumstances in the sense that even our leaders are also not organic.
Majority
they go and train these leaders from their own places and bring them onto our environment, and then they engineer them to take over leadership.
Yeah, because they're sponsored.
And that they do across the board. They do it in government, political leadership, they do it in technical areas, in agriculture, they do it in all sorts of other sectors. What happens there?
While you are away, by the way.
So that is state capture.
While you are away, your friend in Kenya okayed the GMO, of course, has turned out
I've heard that, and I have been having some discussions with the powers there about the giving a clear signal to genetically modified food in Kenya. Well, these are some of the challenges that we are talking about, and I'm saying that from the Pan-African point of view, our battles have actually just started. Only that this time around, the kind of battle we must fight, and this is what is prevailing, this is what is apparent, this is what is available here, facing us, is not in the manner in which Dr. Kwame Nkrumah fought, Soko Ture fought, Thomas Sankara fought, Patrice Lumumba fought. This kind of battle that we have is the battle of ideology.
The mind,
now,
really.
The mind must be decolonized. You must be liberated. But the problem is that the enemy also creates another force to come and attack this kind of ideological liberation that we are talking about, to the extent that the other man who is even facilitated, oiled very well, will use superior media to look at you as a fascist, as somebody who has been sponsored by, I don't know if these things still exist, but that's what they say, from a certain bloc, and therefore that you are going to lead your economy and your people into a certain direction, they will take ages to recover.
But I think it's also the problem of the Africans ourselves. Why can't we have our own media that can be able to promote the
That's
African
another
thing?
But they invest in making sure you don't see eye to eye. The problem, like I told you earlier.
But they will continue doing that, and they have to do that, and me I support them to do that.
And that's why we are saying that on assuming these positions, whether you're head of the farming community in your country or whatever it is, like he was talking about, the bureaucrats, they talked about state capture in South Africa. But South Africa, the state capture they're talking about is Zuma engineered or whatever. The original state capture is colonial in nature. When they captured our bureaucrats, they captured the politicians, they captured the nurses, they captured such that their soft power, they now have the most aggressive pushers of their agenda look like you and me. Exactly. The other ghost is in the boardrooms in London, making calls to a man and woman who looks like you, but who is very aggressively pushing an agenda that cannot benefit you now, tomorrow, or 1,000 years from now.
Oh yeah.
But they are steeped in this crooked way of doing things.
These are the people who generate ideas.
These are the civil servants. Top leadership.
They'll generate this thing. Let me give you an example, even as I end this whatever I'm saying. These people generate these glorious plans, and they transplant them to Karamoja. Those ones will make Karamoja green. When you look at the thing technically, it is not possible in Uganda. When you look at it in terms of funding, it cannot happen. So who are these people, unless you're developing things for, again, a European company to bring systems that cannot sustain our independence?
They have
that
been
is our
given
problem now.
scholarships to go and study abroad for their masters and PhDs.
Things that don't help
They
us.
are products of Harvard, Yale, Oxford universities. They are here on the African continent. They are the ones who are sent into African Development Bank. The former head of the African Development Bank had to go. Why? He came up with a concept and he beautifully crafted it and exported it to the African leaders that we should not look at agriculture as merely the way we used to look at it, but we should look at agriculture as business.
But
He
one
forgot
said,
the finances
No,
of
no,
the
but one
institution.
said, I think one of the technocrats in this country said, we cannot use agriculture to develop a country. I think it's unreasonable.
But is that rational?
That is wrong.
Rational in a country like Uganda?
Yeah, that you are not going to eat more than you are eating today just because you are rich.
Actually,
But
the projection, he made a projection at that time in the African Development Bank that the multi-billionaires by 2040, no, not even 40, it was 2030 something, is going to be a prosperous agriculturist. The moment your focus, the moment your view of agriculture shifts from the traditional way you used to look at it, and we embrace agriculture as a business, that I do agriculture to make a profit as well as feeding myself. You, Africa, bestowed upon her by God the nature, the resource, the fertility it has, was in no league with any other continent, and therefore was going to provide the best of the output. And therefore, that model, if it had been helped to grow, was going to catapult Africa being the most prosperous continent. And nobody wants to listen to that.
But even just a small example, Mr. Mututa. We don't say that these other things, aside from agriculture, for example, don't need financing. But look at the money they put that is available to refugees, for example. I'm not saying there is something wrong with caring for refugees.
it is everything wrong. Why do we need refugees in the first place?
Just a moment.
And who is causing the refugees?
No, just a moment.
People move.
No, just a moment.
Even where there are no wars, by the way, people move.
But they're not refugees.
That's the concept of citizenship.
Those
We
are
are
not
saying
refugees.
in Uganda, for instance, in Uganda, for instance, look at it. In Uganda, for instance, for a refugee, if you like, to become, to apply to become a national, and now we are going into who is a refugee, what is citizenship, it will take you 25 years. 25 years is
I know,
what we
But what I was trying to
point.
no, just a moment, even before I go away from this, the money that is applied to that, because money that is applied to refugees is not a productive, in other words, you will not get a return for that investment in terms of the welfare of that country in particular. Well, there are some things that come to it, there are some people who work in there and so on and so forth. But, for example, if that money, no strings attached, was just applied to Uganda, just agriculture for 1 year, do you think it would be the same? What we are saying is that the money is never put in any place that will move you where you need to go. Never.
Next time we'll be looking at the funding by the donors and the areas which are funded. But you'll be surprised. But also my point that was that, first of all, when you look at the, okay, take for example, Africa, Uganda in particular, and the rest of the region, the refugees that we're having, what type of refugees are these? These are not the economic refugees that we're having, like people running away from Africa and going to other places. Of course, some places have wars, but there are those who just want to go. And maybe next time we shall talk about it. I thought we'll have time for Uganda, for example. I've been having issues of the girls that are being returned from the Arab world and why they are being returned. We have had Nigerians denied visas and the other countries. I think Uganda is not one of the 10. But when you look at the refugees that we're having in Uganda, most of them are coming from war-torn areas. And those who are giving us money are part of those who are sponsoring some of those conflicts.
No, not some. They are the very ones.
So it is. It defeats us as Africans because.
So you fund the war and you feed this one to have run from the war.
That's. But you see, this is not new again. And this is what we were talking about earlier on. When you look at colonialism, even at that time, the colonial master, the colonial administrator, would be in the colonial office. His cousin would be a reverend father in a Catholic church. After they have whipped you to go and grow coffee, after you have sweated and you have suffered, you will go to a church to pray and thank God, who is actually a white man, and then confess your sins from there.
And you are forgiven.
That's what was happening. Now you can imagine that state of capture. You are physically captured, you are also mentally and ideologically captured. You are finished.
Surely.
Are we safe now?
We are not anyway safer.
You think
what the other question which as we wind
now?
up, the other question I wanted to put to us, are we lamenting?
We are not lamenting.
No, we are not.
We have given.
We are laying the facts bare.
Yes.
You see, I said before, these things our leaders cannot say because it is very expensive to say these things. But for us, the Malemas of this world, we can talk freely. To say, look, the man who financed the war, to say that now he's giving food to the one who ran from the war, there is something wrong with that equation. Now the other one cannot say it because the same man is financing all of his budget. So it has remained to you and me to talk about the things that really are. Eventually, there'll be a breed of leader who goes in there sober. Most of our people go there on the power of a certain kind of political, I don't know what it is. But what you get there and find has nothing in common with what you anticipated. Now we're looking for sober people. You know, look, it is like a man going to a war. You say, look, chances are good that I may not return. We need leaders now at the helm of African politics who say, look, in this chair, I am going to execute what is good, but I may not return.
Are your voters able to discern that?
That level of civic awareness we have not yet achieved. But I think what Rachel is saying is that we must develop a crop of leaders that is going as part of its responsibility to cultivate a spirit of civic awareness in the society, to be able to defend that particular leader. The Cubans were willing to die with their leader. To make sure, up to today, to make sure that we can suffer the economic embargo. But we shall be with our leadership to the end.
Yeah, but of course, you remember the song,
at the cost.
The Beasts of England. So then finally, after things are sorted out, the leaders are behaving differently. But I think that is now
those we no longer need, is
the
what we are
problem
saying.
of the African situation. Yeah,
we need people who are sober and who remain sober, but ultimately knowing that the only way to reach the African dream, super state, is to be willing to lay down your life. If you cannot do that one, you will never take us beyond you.
Don't even dare.
You can go, but you'll never take us.
The death
That's
of
why
Magufuli should not scare the rest of us. The death of Nkwame Nkrumah, the death of Soko Ture, the death of Thomas Sankara, the death of Patrice Lumumba, were all lessons to breed even more fierce leaders. But we seem to be on the decline. Although I am not saying that the likes of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi were not there. We have got, although of course you will get the stories here when you talk about, say, now we are talking about His Excellency, the President of Uganda. It was that time, the revolutionary man that he is now. He has. I want to still give him a lot of credit. I know, of course, there are a number of critics here and there, but in the circumstances he has done well. And I'm very sure that there are other leaders also in the African continent who, given the circumstances that we are going through and the challenges, and benefit of doubt, would do even a much better job. It is our duty, therefore, for us now to make sure that we give the relevant support, but at the same time, to drive the African dream. The agenda, the African agenda is one, the Pan-African agenda.
Tangal, your closing shot on that.
Yes, this has been quite a show, in my view. But I think the long and the short is that this is dead serious business. There is nothing light about what we are saying. There is nothing that... it's not a short-term or even medium-term target. This is something for the decades and for the generations, but you have to start somewhere. So we are saying that if we achieve the mindset that we need, everything begins in the mind. There's nothing you and I do that you have not thought about. Even these, our tormentors, have spent countless hours developing these their wicked schemes. So we have to also similarly invest in the same mindset, whatever the cost, to make sure that we propagate the vision we have seen for us, our children, and their children's children. It's a very deliberate and calculative approach to the promised land.
Yeah, many things need to be done on this continent, and the leaders need to stand up to the call, because without leadership, we're definitely continue talking the same thing, the year in, year out. But Africa needs to be liberated. And if the liberation has to take place, it has to start with the leadership. So that leadership, and that time we were talking about the African Parliament, say, by the way, where is this African Parliament and what does it do? Not many people do that. There are many things that many Africans don't, like not...
The African Parliament?
Yes.
The Pan-African
Parliament. Do you really need to know where it is?
They were fighting, recently they were fighting. Those who speak French were fighting those who speak English and because they wanted to develop, they wanted the modulus operandi was that those who speak French were dominating those who speak English.
Do you really want to know where it is?
Brother Marema was in the mix of the fight.
Exactly.
Now we are that
bad. So that's how bad we are. Talking of leadership, I mean, if that's the type of leadership you have at the top, then you can understand the problems of Africa, that the problems are not as small, as visible as we see. And when you check, you go backwards, you'll find France is involved in the fight. Then you are like,
and is Spain, and is Italy, and is America.
You see, they have got to be interested, because the more you are divided
you want to break
on
free.
The African continent, the more they will keep benefiting.
Exactly.
They have to keep you in that form.
Exactly. Viewer, we can't end this any better than this, but I know next week we shall be back here with more interesting discussions, and you can always join us. I think we have not been giving these people the forum, the chance to participate in some of these discussions, but I think we now need to have a dedicated number on which the WhatsApp and the other avenues through which they can be talking to us. But you can also check the Pan-African Friday on YouTube. That material which is uploaded there, you can make your comments and you can for now interact there. Next week, same time, same station, will be with you, and we thank you for your time that you have been with us and will continue being with us. UBC will continue with the usual programs that you enjoy, and we thank our technical team and the whole production team. And on behalf of my co-panelists, I say thank you and have a lovely Friday. Welcome.